was supposed to be somebody to introduce me, so I'll just introduce myself. I just don't want to lose time, so I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Ted Miles. I actually oversee the youth and religious education engagement for Catholic Relief Services, managing some of our national partnerships that we have here in the United States. How many of you have ever heard of CRS before? So CRS, for those of you that haven't, is the official international relief and development arm of the U.S. Catholic Church. Think of Catholic Charities International. So Catholic Charities serves the domestic reality, and then we serve the global reality. And but part of what we also do is to try to engage U.S. Catholics in an understanding of mission and solidarity, helping U.S. Catholics to live their faith in solidarity with the people that we serve around the world. It is a beautiful way of expressing mission and learning more about how our sisters and brothers around the world are impacted by poverty. And for me, I got into this in large part because when I was young, my parents were involved in a Catholic community for marriage encounter, and their community, the other couples that they joined together with, we would take vacations together, have dinners together, do all sorts of great things. But included in that was a real commitment to service, and that continued to be formed throughout my life. Even when I was in high school, I went to a public school, because there were no Catholic high schools around, but nonetheless, my parents, through their example of their whole community, actually, not just my parents, it kind of instilled this understanding of a social tradition and a social tradition in our faith. And so my hope today is to break open that a little bit. What does that mean to be part of a parish that is really committed to mission and is committed to breaking that open? So what I'd like you to do, because we'll have maybe a couple moments at different points for conversation, what I'd like you to do is perhaps pair up with somebody. If you want to do groups of 3, that's fine. And I'd like you to introduce yourself, where you're from, and your primary ministry in your parish communities or school communities or wherever that may be. But then also, what was an early experience of church that inspired mission in you? So just like for me, it was witnessing my parents, and as they brought us out, sometimes kicking and screaming, but as they brought us out to serve, that became an experience of church that wasn't just limited to the building, but it went out into the world. And so for you, what was one of those early touchstone memories that you had where church was involved in mission? the session today, you'll notice that I called the session We Are Salt and Light. And as we all know, Catholic social teaching has a variety of different principles, and there's all different sorts of ways of teaching it. I'm not going to be going through those distinct ways because, well, how many of you teach children? And how many of you teach high school youth, middle school? Okay, how many of you teach adults? So I think we all know that you would teach this in different ways at different age levels. I heard somebody in the last session that I taught talk to me a little bit about what she was doing with kindergartens, and she talked about a Hallelujah parade, and I thought, I never would have thought of anything like that, because I don't work with little children. I just play happy uncle with my nieces and nephews. But that said, what I'd like to do is to give some overriding principles that come out of a beautiful site developed by the Bishop's Justice, Peace, and Human Development Office called wearesaltandlight.org. And what it does is provide an overarching framing of the Church's social mission, including Catholic social teaching, principles and so forth. But it also provides a much broader framework. And what I invite you to do is I go through some of these key principles today for us to consider. I invite you to think about how that might apply to your different age group. And I will give you some examples of resources as we go through. But to begin, what I'd like to do is to start with the parable of the parish. On a dangerous sea coast where shipwrecks often occur, there was once a crude little life-saving station. The building was just a hut, and there was only one boat, but the completely devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea with no thought for themselves. They went out day and night, tirelessly searching for the lost. Many were saved by this situation, so it became famous. Some of those who were saved and various others in the surrounding areas wanted to become associated with the station and give up their time and money and effort for the support of its work. New boats were brought, and crews were trained. The little life-saving station grew. Some members of the life-saving station were unhappy, though, that the building was so crude and poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided as the first refuge of those saved from sea. So they replaced the cots with beds and put better furniture in and enlarged it to a more elaborate building. Now, the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members who were proud of it, and they redecorated it beautifully and furnished it exquisitely because they used it as a kind of club. Fewer of the members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do this work. The life-saving motif still prevailed in the club decorations, however, and there was a liturgical lifeboat in the room where club initiations were held. Now, about this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, half-drowned people. They were dirty and wounded and sick, and some had differently colored skin. The beautiful new club was left untidy and muddy, and so the property committee immediately had a shower house built outside the club where the victims of shipwreck could be cleaned up before coming inside. At the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's activities as being somewhat beneath them and an unpleasant hindrance to the normal social life of the club. Some of the members insisted that life-saving was their primary purpose and pointed out that they were known as a life-saving station. But they were finally voted down and told that if they wanted to save all the various kinds of people with different colors of skin and strange languages and odd religions who were shipwrecked on those waters, they could start their own life-saving station down the coast. And so they did. And as the years went by, the new station experienced the same changes that had occurred in the old, and it evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. History continued to repeat itself, and if you visit that seacoast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along that shore. The parable of the parish. It's a bit challenging. I know it's a bit The story itself is a bit jolting. And yet at the same time, sometimes our own parishes operate a little bit more as clubs than they really do as life-saving stations committed with a great sense of mission, inviting everybody in, regardless of who they are and the condition that they're in. And yet, if we talk about what it means to be a good news parish, a parish rooted in the gospel, well, we're following the example of Christ, who went out with love abandoned and just poured it out for everybody and welcomed everybody and accompanied as many as he could. When you think of our social mission, it invites us to do something a little bit differently sometimes than just gathering as a club. Not to say that gathering isn't important. I'll come back to that in a second. What do you see here? How do you see the duck or the bird? Yep. And then the rabbit kind of looking up this way. All right. What do you see here? An old lady or a young lady? See both? Some of you may have seen this before. The old lady, 2 eyes, nose, mouth, kind of looking this way. The young lady, her eye, ear, chin, kind of wearing a choker, looking that way. See that? All right. And what do you see here? A woman's face jumping out. Yeah, and it almost looks like Bill Clinton playing the saxophone. So, in order to get the full effect of an optical illusion, what is it that you have to do? So look at it, think outside the box.
Think about different perspectives.
Yep, look at it from different perspectives. Look a little bit deeper, look again, take a second look. Well, in a sense, that is what our social tradition invites us to do. In fact, at the heart of our social tradition is the respect for the dignity of all life, the respect for all life. And the root meaning of the word respect is to look again, to take a second look, to look deeper. You get into the root, the etymology of that word. So our social tradition invites us to do that same thing, to look more deeply into the world and to understand where God's love can be wrought, to understand more deeply the dignity and the sacredness of all of life, to understand more deeply our connectedness, not to see each other as different, even despite our uniquenesses and despite our differences, but to recognize that there's an inherent commonality that we all share that makes us one human family. So when we get into talking about being a good news parish, when we get into talking about our social tradition, we're inviting us to a new way of imagining who we are. If all we did was look at the news, you would pretty much see a world full of greed and violence and division. And yet, that isn't who we are first. We're made from a God of love whose very nature is relationship. Father, Son, Spirit, Creator, Redeemer, Sanctifier. And we are called into that same relationship with God and with each other because our very nature, made from a being whose nature is relationship, our very nature is relationship and love. And what would happen if we really began to see each other that way? What would happen if our parishes really imagined that and brought that to life and owned it and lived it? Catholic social teaching. Take a look. Our social tradition really begins from the very beginning. It's God's mission. This God of relationship, this God of love, has a mission that was meant for everybody. This God whose love is all-inclusive and breaks through all boundaries invites us to do the same. And through the example of Christ, who said, then go to all of us, to all of his disciples, we bring that love through our own actions, our own breaking through boundaries, out into the world itself. God's mission has us. We often say that the church has a mission, and there's truth to that, yes. But reality is, God's mission was there first. The bigger mission, the mission of love, the mission of inclusiveness of all people. God's mission has a church. God's mission has us. Gosh, if we really embrace that as church, amazing what it would be. CST, our social tradition over time that has evolved, helps provide a little bit of a framework of action. And while there are certain principles behind that, what might that action look like? So I'll invite you to another short conversation. So think of your parishes today. Give one example to each other of how you think your parish really captures a sense of mission, a sense of love for the other, for the marginalized, for those who are not included. How does your parish capture that spirit of mission? Embrace that we are a mission. One example with each other, and then hear a little bit out loud. God is good all the time. All right, let's just hear a couple, just call out what are some ways that your parishes live out its vocation, embrace mission.
We have soup kitchen. We do a monthly lunch for the homeless.
Excellent. Soup kitchen monthly lunch.
Christ the King now has the mission on Beaufort Highway for the growing Hispanic population in that area. So they physically can't have enough masses on the weekend, actually have to be built, so they started a mission.
But bringing a mission that is more cultural or in Spanish or?
It's in Spanish and also I'm now teaching PSR classes in that mission also.
Great. So also meeting people where they're at. Okay.
Yep.
Good. Anybody else? Thoughts?
We also do, our children collect uniforms, and like tomorrow is one of the days we'll be passing out uniforms to the community for those people who can't necessarily afford to purchase uniforms.
And the uniforms go to?
They're for school, so they go to the community, the neighboring children from the community will be able to come to the park that's by our parish and pick up.
Wonderful. Awesome. Other thoughts?
Our teams do a Mission Possible, which is like a week-long volunteers, or like you get up at like 7 o'clock in the morning and you're there till 4, just doing like different community, like within like our area, doing different service jobs, and then like you'll go and do an activity at night, but it's all day service and then club.
Excellent. And the teens are doing that?
Yes.
Great. Anybody else?
Christ the King School has Christ the King service where the parents have formed service contracts to get all the kids involved. This is from kindergarten up to grade 8. And they go out to the community, the parents identify the needs that interested in the kids. I don't know if they get to.
Wonderful. So an example that's led by the parents, but then invites all the
Sort of
children.
like started, like encouraged by the school, then taken by the
Nice.
parents, and really taken out.
Excellent.
So our middle schoolers, we kind of like what you were talking about with, they said it's like a week-long thing. So they, go from once until around the certain community.
Yep.
And high schoolers do gymnastic, mission trip.
Yep.
And so like this year they're in Charleston, well they did too, but we're going to Charleston. And then, for those who graduated, like early college, some adults, they go to Toronto.
Wonderful. What I love about these examples is we hit every age group being named, from adults to children to middle school to high school. Everybody can be a part of that. What is the parish vocation? Well, there was a wonderful document written by the bishops many years ago called Communities of Salt and Light. And I'd like to just read this to you because it just captures so beautifully. The parish is where the church lives. So the mission, God's mission has a church. This is where that church lives through each of us. Parishes are communities of faith, of action, and of hope. They are where the gospel is proclaimed and celebrated, where believers are formed and then sent to renew the earth. We don't just stay and make private clubs. And unfortunately, if that's what a parish is doing, it's missing half of the mission of who we are. We are formed but then sent. Parishes are the home of the Christian community. They are the heart of our church. We are called to be salt of the earth and light of the world in the words of Scripture. This task belongs to every believer, from the children all the way up, and every parish. It cannot be assigned to a few or simply delegated to diocesan or national structures. The pursuit of justice and peace is an essential part of what makes a parish Catholic. And so what might that look like? Well, one, couple principles to share with you. One, I think Good News Parish both gathers and sends. So that is important. It's important for us to gather and to nourish each other. Jesus, as a teacher, who they would call rabbi, gathered his disciples. They were formed. They witnessed Jesus. They learned from him. But then they didn't just stay there. They were sent. They went off as well. That was the rabbinic tradition in Jesus' day. And so the same is for us. We gather to nourish each other, to celebrate with each other, to learn from each other, to gain wisdom from each other. We do it over potlucks, we do it over classes, we do it over social events, but we also do it in a way of just trying to pull the service project together. And of course, we do that at liturgy, the source and the summit, where first we understand our need for God, who then through that tradition of liturgy, we also learn that we are also dependent on each other too. That we're invited, and we learn from our God who calls us into love, but we also recognize that it's all around us. And we can't do this alone. None of us got where we are today alone, independent of anyone else. We're interdependent. We need each other. So the Good News Parish gathers, and when it gathers well, it forms people to be sent. And that is everything from Catholic charities to St. Vincent de Paul, to your work camps, to your service projects. It is the Jesuit volunteers, it's Maranola missioners. It is whenever we go out through twinning relationships, or when we go out even just to serve our families, homebound ministries, hospice ministries, everything is encompassed when we go out, when we serve, everything is encompassed in that sending. It's like what Thomas Merton used to do. Pray with the Bible in one hand and pray with the newspaper in the other. How does the Bible of yesteryear teach us to respond to today? People had similar problems back in the day of Jesus, and yet Christ called them into each other's lives to respond and to meet the needs. Diaconia, that was the early service of the church. And we follow that practice today when we go and we are sent. But we are informed by that beautiful tradition that Christ left for us of love, of of service to each other, of mission to the earth. Second, the Good News Parish is engaged in mission, not maintenance. One of the biggest complaints that I hear from young people, they're the worst 7 words ever uttered in a parish. We have always done it this way. And that's what gets us stuck. And I think that's what Pope Francis, in a way, is trying to call us out of. It was his call to the Jubilee Year of Mercy to pull us out of being stuck, because people have heard enough of God's judgment, as the Holy Father said, and not enough of God's mercy and compassion. And so thus, for us, how can we move out of our way sometimes? I love Calvin and Hobbes. Wow, it really snowed last night, isn't it wonderful? Everything familiar has disappeared, the world looks brand new. A new year, a fresh, clean start. It's like having a big white sheet of paper to draw on, a day full of possibilities. It's a magical world, old Hobbes, old buddy. Let's go exploring. Let's go exploring how we can serve the world. And our sacramental imagination helps us to understand the world differently. That it isn't a world of despair. Yes, there is despair in the world, but we can be the good news in that despair. Yes, there is violence in the world, but we can be that voice of peace and connection and solidarity. Yes, there is poverty in the world, but we can be that voice of abundance, of love and communion and companionship amidst all of that. I love how the Catechism describes the Beatitudes. It talks about the vocation to beatitude. In other words, the Beatitudes aren't just spiritual principles or statements. They're active. They call us into becoming and living and acting and breathing the body of Christ. So it isn't something we just name on a Sunday, but that when we gather as Eucharist, as the body of Christ, we go and then live as the body of Christ. It's active, it's dynamic, it's serving. One example. I was so moved by this. I'm sure you've all heard about the struggles that Baltimore has had over the last 2.5 years. It's my hometown, it breaks my heart to watch. 2.5 years ago when Freddie Gray was killed, we all know the civil unrest that occurred as a result of that. It truly inspired the leaders of faith communities throughout Baltimore, including Bishop Laurie, leader of our shepherd of our church in Baltimore. And so he gathered the faith leaders of all the different denominations of Baltimore. He gathered them and said, we need to start setting an example. We need to become involved. We need to be living our faith amidst the challenges of Baltimore. So he took them all on a retreat to Rome. They met with the Holy Father, as a matter of fact. And they started looking at how they, as faith communities, could respond to the challenges of Baltimore. One of the things that the Catholic Church has been doing since then is having a peace walk once a month, and it rotates from urban parish to urban parish. But on the 1-year anniversary of Freddie Gray's death, in the Basilica, the first cathedral in Maryland, in the United States, Bishop Laurie had an ecumenical peace prayer service in which people of all faiths gathered. Bishop Laurie, in his humility, came forward, he did the welcome, and then he stepped back. There was then the call of the shofar from the Jewish leaders. There was an imam who came forward and did a prayer of hospitality and welcome. And then every leader read a passage from their holy books and shared a brief reflection. It was profound. And at the end, we all gathered and joined hands and sang, "We Shall Overcome." That was all inspired by the Catholic Church. That's a man who understands mission. That was truly a moment where we as church were not involved in maintenance anymore, but it became mission amidst the struggles of Baltimore. The Good News Parish journeys together. Several years ago, I had the chance to go to Ecuador as part of a trip with CRS. And I stayed in a Amazonian community as part of a little vacation afterwards. But one of the things that I learned in the Andean region is that they have what tradition was known as Minca or Minga. And the literal translation is the community that journeys together. Well, where I was staying, this community was receiving a canoe, they were riverbound, from an inland community where huge trees grew, and the trees were used to make the canoes. So that other community was necessary for them to have their canoes, because the riverbound community didn't have thick trunked trees. So the other community cut one down, carved it out, but the community that was riverbound had to bring that canoe, a 1,000-pound canoe, across the Amazon, across the land that separated their communities, to the 15, still going on. More people have come. 10:30, the 8 o'clock liturgy finally lets out. Not one complaint, not one person left. They went in, they erupted in this huge gospel song, and the Mass just went on for 2 hours. At the offertory, people from around the city, people with very little means, brought forth baskets of food and goods, even a goat and a bunch of cages of chickens. They were all brought forward so that the pastor could then take whatever he needs for the week for his food, but then take the rest to surrounding villages as he goes out and does his ministry during the week. Again, that's a community that journeys together. We can do the same. In your parishes, if you do the Rice Bowl program, that's a way of journeying with people around the world. When you pray with them, when you learn about their reality, when you give during the season of Lent, that's a way of journeying with the church around the world. We're also launching a new program this year for elementary schools during Respect Life Month called the Little Flower Challenge. And it's a way of learning about life issues from womb to tomb. And we're focusing this year on water. And it's actually for elementary and middle school children. It'll be launched in September 1st, but something I encourage you to look at because it'll help little children, help younger children understand some of the realities that people face around the world that we often take for granted. And then what is it that we can do to conserve water, to give gratitude for the water, but then to also recognize how water is a right for all. So, the Good News Parish journeys together, and it's engaged in prophetic dialogue. So this is my nephew, Kavetta. And Kavetta is an interesting young boy. He is rambunctious, he's brilliant, has a great mind, but he hates school. And he'll often tell me how much he hates his homework. And he'll often say, homework just does me no good, I don't learn anything from it. And I'll talk to him about reinforcing it, his parents will do the same. And he'll go on about it, it's like, I don't need it because I'm already smart. So you talk, you try to reason with him, and in fact, there was one time when we were trying to do that, and he says to me, you know, Uncle Ted, as a second grader, I'm not a kid anymore. I like stories that are more interesting than the stupid books that we read. So I told the teacher they were stupid. And that's when his mother leaned in and says, and that's when we got our first note sent home. But yet, sometimes we get like that. We get stuck in our own views and our own ways. We don't open ourselves up to listening to others. And I think that's one of the challenges we're facing in society these days, in our own politics. We're not listening to each other. We're not engaged in a civil dialogue. And that can even creep into our religious communities. And yet, we, as good news people, are called to really listen to each other, to open our ears, hearts, minds. And I think that's what the Holy Father is trying to model for us. He's not doing anything different, he's not breaking any church teaching, but he is waking us up to listen. In fact, just watch what he does on Holy Thursdays. His first Holy Thursday, rather than washing the feet of other priests in the Vatican or in St. Peter's, he went out to a youth prison and washed the feet of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim young adults. He's going to a nursing home. He's going to a homeless center. And this past year, he went to a prison. That's a man who is listening carefully to where there is hurt in the world and where compassion is needed. And we're invited to do the same, to recognize that we come from a family. We come from a school, church, and a local community, and a city and state. But all too often, this is kind of where we stop. I know that's true for young people, at least, that I work with. But we're also part of the nation. And we have to figure some things out as a nation. And we're part of a global community And we have to figure those same things out. So, one way to begin to engage in prophetic dialogue is just to begin to listen to each other and invite us to name what are the challenges that we face in our families, in our communities, and in our world. Just to put it out there. And when we begin to listen, that some of us see these challenges similarly, some of us see these challenges differently, we can at least begin to acknowledge one thing, that we're not in right relationship. And so thus, how can we begin to use that starting point as a way of moving to right relationship? And one of the ways that I think we can do this, and this is what I try to do with young people, what gives you joy? What makes you happy? What is it that your gifts and your talents really gives you a sense of purpose and meaning? And when they begin to name that, and then we begin to talk about how you can put that to service of others, well, it doesn't matter what your issue is, or your issue is, or your issue is. What matters is that we're all out there serving. And then all of a sudden, we engage in this act of discernment. Whereas Frederick Buechner says, the kind of work God usually calls you to do is work that you need most to do, and that the world needs most to have done. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. There are so many hungers out there. There's so many concerns out there. Rather than getting into a shouting match over what's more important, maybe if we just started naming them and then saying, let's go and serve this together and lead people's giftedness to those places of need, boy, that's mission. All of a sudden, things look differently. So one way of doing that, we have an Ark of Hope program that we just launched, which helps to educate children about some of the needs of struggling communities around the world. And through that program, they can then purchase animals or a seedling, honeybees, and so forth to support that community. Sierra's Food Fast is a way of helping to engage young people in an experience of hunger, high school students. And then when we begin to feel that and know that, they go through a 24-hour fast. It's not the same as somebody who goes without food, but still, you get a little bit of an inkling, and all of a sudden, I have a sense of compassion. And maybe I can start to do something differently as a result.
I'm working with the young people, a lot of times at our church. One is kind of in their city, so we see a lot of struggle in the community. And sometimes it's not difficult to get our kids to want to do projects, but it's difficult to get our kids to want to go global when they talk about the fact that, so we talk about feeding, or let's do this for, I'm just going to say hungry, just stuck in my mind. For this country or that country.
Right.
Oftentimes they'll say, but right up under the bridge, like not even a mile from our church, there's a whole homeless, community or section. And those people, why can't we do something for them? And then when you're dealing with, of course, limited resources, you can't say, well, we're not doing enough for them because, Catholic Youth Services or Father says that we need to do. And it is often sometimes directed by, who our priest is and what his passions are about what we do for the, Catholic Youth Services or other type organizations. But what we have found is that the young people, they have their own definite, who they feel like they want to help. And I sometimes find it a struggle to say, well, we got to do this, because it's almost like saying, but then this isn't important. So I find it hard to, I try to steer them both ways.
Yeah.
So, if we got two pennies, we put one in this bucket and one in that bucket. But sometimes they push back and say, we don't want to do that. We want to do this. And so we have done things that, directly impact, because one of the things that they say is that, we see this, and these are the things that we want to help. And not that the other things aren't important, but, they want to see what we're getting.
And I think that's a very natural response, particularly from young people, because it is right in front of them, and young people tend to be more immediate, and also they're moved more quickly by what they see. Two thoughts that come to mind. One, when I was teaching, and I would be doing all of this myself, the young people that would say, yeah, well, it's fine to help those people, but we should always, there's more people around us in need. That kind of statement always creates, it highlighted the division that we sometimes create. And I found that those students would say that would really help nobody. But yet, the young people that said, okay, I understand there's this reality, but there's also this reality. I think that old adage of think globally, act locally is key for young people. That when we talk of poverty, we don't just talk about it as right here in Baltimore, right here in Atlanta, but we talk about it acknowledging the reality here and across the world. But what can I do? Well, I can do something as a young person right here. Other times, too, they're surprised at what they can do for people beyond. And so I think it's important to try to stretch them, but I do agree that the starting place for young people is going to be, is more often than not going to be local. But it's important not then to let them off the hook.
Yeah.
If they're going to say that, well then, all right, let's do it. Let's challenge it. Take their dare.
And we do the rice bowl,
Yeah.
and we, encourage them in the Sunday school
Yeah.
community. We do the rice bowl. I just feel as a youth leader, particularly of the teenagers, high schoolers, I feel sometimes like I don't really know what to tell them because, sometimes they have a very compelling argument that I don't exactly know how to address in the minds of, in the context of, we can help these people and help these people, or without it seeming like we're making light of one plight or the other, because hunger is hunger, and homelessness is homelessness,
Yep.
and some places are more able to do things than others. But I've always struggled with how to put that in words for the young people.
And it leads into this next one. The Good News Parish is writing relationships. And for young people to see themselves, it's important for them to see themselves as being able to contribute, being able to make a difference. And that's why I think acting locally is key for young people. But this whole sense of 2 feet of love and action invites us to explore the much bigger perspective. And so we see that there's charity that's needed. Somebody's hungry, I can feed them. Somebody's cold, I can do a blanket drive. Somebody is in need of education, I can tutor. So there is that immediate need, but then in the reflection, in the conversation that follows, in the journaling that we give them, do we break open questions that help them to look bigger? And so for instance, how do you see this? So how do you see hunger in other parts of the world? Where have you heard about it in the news? And do we invite them to look at the root causes? So you were at a soup kitchen today. What did you hear as you listened to stories that helped you to understand why someone was coming into that soup kitchen? Did you hear a story of mental illness and inability to get health care? Did you hear somebody who lost their jobs? Did you hear somebody who can't find a job? Did you hear about somebody who just got out of prison and then they can't get a job? So do we help them look at those questions? And that begins to gradually increase the global mindset. And so when you show a video of another place and in the world, and then they begin to look at those root causes, it continues to instill a bigger heart. And so I think sometimes it's the subtle ways that we do it as well. And the beautiful thing about this 2 feet of love and action is that it gets young people thinking that, yes, I can do something right now, but 2, we can change things as well. If we begin to challenge them to look at the root causes and then demonstrate, particularly for Catholic charities organizations and others that we know, the differences that they make and how they get to the root causes. So it's a beautiful image that I think works very well with young people. But here's an example of sometimes how to get into looking at right relationships that's challenging. Whenever there is a shooting that we know about, so usually in Baltimore, in my parish, whenever there's a shooting that we know about, either in Baltimore and sometimes the more national, the ones that hit national news, our pastor, during the prayers of the faithful, will name those people. So it's become commonplace. We name the victims of the murders every Sunday during our prayers of the faithful. Last year, after the Pulse shooting, Father Joe named not 49 names, but 50. He named Omar Mateen. Now talk about pushing us into right relationship, because most of us probably would have just stopped right there and not named the shooter, which all of a sudden makes you question, well, gosh, first of all, yes, he's my brother. I may not want to admit that right now, but he's still my brother. And then it really leads us into a deeper reflection. What happened to him that would lead him to do that? What love was absent in his life? What happened that brought him to that kind of act of vengeance or hatred? And so I think there are those subtle ways that we can, well, maybe not so subtle, that we can call people back into right relationship and help us to recognize that it's not so easy. So the Good News Parish does not leave the good news work to the Social Concerns Committee, a simple, practical one. But this was an example that has always impressed me. In 1991, Bishop Ken Untner challenged his entire diocese for 3 months just to ask the question for every Catholic gathering: how shall what we are doing here affect or involve the poor? So whether you were on the liturgy, pastoral council, youth ministry, or whatever, you had to ask that question. Talk about moving people into a new way of thinking and asking, well, who's not here and why aren't they here? So there's examples of how we can do that. In the Diocese of Richmond, they have this extraordinary diocesan twinning relationship with Haiti. And so they work with the Haiti Ministry Commission, or a commission down in Haiti as well. But all ministries contribute to that or involved in that. And they've created this entire kit that it's not just for the social concerns, but there's religious education material, there's liturgical material, there's parish council leadership. So you begin to get a full picture of how we're all involved in this. In St. Peter and Paul in Cary, Illinois, a youth minister, a good friend of mine, started a service program called Discipleship Groups, where she invited adults to come forward, name a way that they wanted to invite young people into service through their own gifts and talents. So if you're a mechanic, we can fix cars for low-income families. I'm concerned about abortion, I'm involved in Rachel's project. I serve at the soup kitchen, I knit, and so I want to do that for mothers expecting or for elderly. Well, they put it all out there, 20 or 30 different types of groups. They invite the young people to come forward and sign up for one that they commit to for a whole year. And that adult mentors and apprentices the young people. They commit to service each month, an evening reflection on that, and then there's a beginning year retreat, mid-year retreat, end-of-year retreat. It's a beautiful model of discipleship. They had 20 kids in her first year and 3 groups. They now have 20 to 30 groups annually and over 400 kids involved in this. So there's ways that we can really invite people into this new way of thinking and bringing the good news to all of our ministries. And then, the Good News Parish is both salt and light. When you think of salt, it adds flavor. It speaks of preserving, it speaks of trying to add some substance to something. When you think about light, it's beaming. Being salt and light is being prophetic. And we can all do this in so many different ways, individually and communally. By praying, through our communion, through our learning together, through our celebrating together, and through inviting people into various forms of service. Individuals inspire communities, and communities serve to form individuals. When we look at it that way, it becomes this beautiful dynamic effort. So one way that you can do that, and actually I apologize because I mailed to my hotel a packet of handouts, and the ones for the other session came, but not this one. So I'll give you my email, the rest of it, I can email this to you. But one thing I've created when I was serving as a campus minister was ways that we could integrate the Catholic social teaching themes into the commemorations and liturgical calendar each month throughout the year. So there's different celebrations that really bring to light creatively the different principles of Catholic social teaching. So I'll give you my email address so that I can email you the handout and you can have that. Also, Catholic writer Ann Neuberger has developed the principles of Catholic social teaching for children, and Catholic Mom, CatholicMom.org, beautiful educator, she has developed ways of looking at Catholic social teaching for families. So there's ways that we can begin to invite people to this dynamic of really forming each other and inspiring each other. And I think the principles allow that. Last point. The Good News Parish enters the chaos of the world. So the reality is, we know the world is broken. And as we go into that, it's not going to be easy. When I heard, after the Holy Father declared the Year of Mercy, I heard Father James Martin in an interview say that mercy is entering into the chaos of the world. And I think that's what we're all called to do as a Good News Parish. But it's in that brokenness where we discover the thin places of life. That's a Celtic notion that means there's very little that separates us from the experience of God. There's very little that separates heaven and earth at that moment. Because in the brokenness of the world, we're called to this deep love in which we give of ourselves. And then we also find ourselves receiving. Every time I've gone into a place of service, God has surprised me. And every time I have entered into the brokenness of another or someone who's broken, come into my own brokenness, God has surprised me. And in the end, I think that what I'm learning, slowly but surely, is that the reign of God means to let no one be anonymous. So as Good News Parish, how can we lead others into the brokenness and discover that God is already there and working in the way that we serve each other? This is a beautiful story of Beata and Marco. They're from Rwanda. Actually, they're in Rwanda. Marco was part of the Hutus, and he killed all the Beata's family, except for her daughter. She and her daughter were in hiding. Her daughter was 2 months old. The rest of her family, her husband, her brothers and sisters and parents were slaughtered. And Marco, after the genocide in Rwanda in '94, was arrested and put into jail. If you know anything about that history, the country has struggled to reach a place of reconciliation of all of that. And part of one of the things that they also discovered is that all of those who were arrested, the jails had become overcrowded, and it was also not leading to any real reconciliation. And so they started this process where if someone was willing to enter into this place of forgiveness, they would bring the perpetrators of the violence to meet with the victims, and they would work through a process in which they would come to a place of forgiveness. And there was usually some restitution that was then assigned. They had to do something to try to make up for that and demonstrate that. Well, Marco was indeed free. Beata was willing to go into this process. Interestingly enough, however, when you get out of jail, after so many years, you don't have any money to pay off anything. And so most of these victims had to then forgive the restitution too. It's almost like a double whammy, in my opinion. And Beata had to do that. And then Marco went on living in her community. Again, something that she really had to work to do, knowing exactly what was going to happen. Well, years later, Marco comes to her, and actually, this is right at the time when I hadn't got the chance to meet them on a delegation. And Marco came to Beata and said, we have an interesting situation on our hands. My son has fallen in love with your daughter and would like to ask for her hand in marriage. And Beata's response was, who am I to let the sins of the past get in the way of love today? All of that was fostered through a reconciliation process that was led really by the church. And then the two of them got married, and now they have a grandchild, and they are truly as family. That, perhaps, is probably one of the most courageous acts of good news I've ever seen in my entire life. But if we really embrace that and enter into that brokenness, that chaos, look what is possible. The Good News Parish, it gathers and sends, it's engaged in mission, not maintenance, it journeys together in prophetic dialogue and in writing relationships. It doesn't leave it to just a few, it's everybody, as we enter in together in the chaos of the world. So the question I leave with you is, how is your community a Good News Parish? Continue to think about some of that, and I hope it inspires some creativity. In light of the time, I'll just remind you about a great resource where you can find more information. I think this more or less covers it, but essentially, I have found that Catholics, young people, and people of all ages are willing to do the difficult when they know that there's a community with them, and when they really understand this dynamic God who calls us ever deeper into love. Let's not shy away from that message and invite people into a rich, rich mission in which the adventure that will behold us will be unlike any other. And so what I'd like to do is just close with this prayer, if you don't mind. It's actually the prayer from the document on the Pastoral Council leadership. I just think it captures so beautifully what we're about. So we pray. God of love and mercy, you call us to be your people. You give us with your abundant grace. Make us a holy people, radiating the fullness of your love. Form us into a community of people who care, expressing your compassion. Remind us day after day of our baptismal call to serve with joy and courage. Teach us how to grow with wisdom and grace and joy in your presence. Through Jesus and your Spirit, we make this prayer. Amen. So thank you. I appreciate your time today being with us. I appreciate all that you do to inspire mission in our church. We need your leadership, so thank you for that. And I hope you have a good rest of the day.
And what's your